The house felt empty without her. Only a few days had passed since Mama Grace was buried beneath the old baobab tree overlooking the village. Yet to David Okoro, the silence inside her small mud brick home felt heavier than any funeral. Outside, the late afternoon sun painted the African sky in shades of gold and orange. A gentle wind moved through the tall grass, carrying distant sounds of children playing and birds calling from the trees. But inside the house, there was only silence. David stood in the middle of the room, staring at his mother's belongings. As one of the richest men in the country, he owned luxury homes, expensive cars, and businesses across continents. Yet none of those things mattered now. His mother was gone. Slowly, he began sorting through her possessions. Old clothes. Worn cooking pots. Family photographs faded by time. Each item carried a memory. Each memory carried pain. A sad smile appeared on David's face as he remembered her voice. Asterisk, never forget where you came from, my son. Asterisk. He swallowed hard. Then something caught his attention. Beneath the wooden bed where Mama Grace had slept for years, he noticed a corner of something hidden in the shadows. David knelt down. His heart suddenly beat faster. Carefully pulling it out, he discovered a small wooden box covered in dust. It was old. Very old. A rusted lock sealed it shut. Attached to the top was a folded piece of paper. David recognized the handwriting immediately. His mother's. With trembling fingers, he opened the note. Only one sentence was written inside. Asterisk, open this only after I am gone. Asterisk. A chill ran through his body. Why would his mother hide something like this? What secret had she carried to her grave? After a long moment, David found a small key taped beneath the box. His hand shook as he unlocked it. The lid slowly creaked open. Inside were dozens of old letters. Several photographs. And a single birth certificate. Confused, David picked it up. His eyes moved across the page. Then suddenly stopped. The name read, Samuel Okoro. Date of birth, 20 years ago. David frowned. He had never heard that name before. Then his gaze dropped to the section marked father's name. The color drained from his face. His breathing stopped. Written clearly on the document was only one name. David Okoro. And in that terrifying moment, everything he thought he knew about his life began to fall apart. David's hands would not stop shaking. The birth certificate lay on the table beside him as the evening darkness slowly filled the room. Outside, rain clouds gathered over the village, and distant thunder rolled across the sky. Inside the small house, David stared at the stack of letters hidden inside his mother's box. His heart pounded. Who was Samuel Okoro? And why was his name listed as the father? Taking a deep breath, he picked up the first letter. It was written in Mama Grace's familiar handwriting. As he began reading, memories he had buried years ago slowly returned. 20 years earlier, before he became a billionaire, David had been a young man with big dreams and very little money. During those days, he had fallen deeply in love with a beautiful village girl named Amina. Amina was kind, gentle, and full of hope. David remembered long walks beneath the baobab trees, laughing together beside the river, and promising that one day he would return after building a better life in the city. He had loved her. Truly loved her. His eyes filled with tears as he continued reading. Then came the words that made his stomach twist. Amina became pregnant shortly after he left for the city. David lowered the letter. His mind refused to believe it. No, he whispered. He never knew. Not once during those 20 years had anyone told him. With trembling fingers, he grabbed another letter. This one revealed an even darker truth. Mama Grace had learned about the pregnancy months later. She knew Samuel existed. She knew David had a son. Yet somehow, the secret remained hidden. David's chest tightened painfully. Then he opened another envelope. And another. Each letter revealed more heartbreak. Amina had written to him again and again. She sent letters, messages, even photographs. She begged for help. She begged for answers. She begged him to come home. But David had never received a single one. Not one. The letters simply vanished. Someone had intercepted them. Someone had made sure he never knew. Rain suddenly began hitting the roof above him. David's breathing became heavy. For 20 years, he believed Amina had abandoned him. For 20 years, he thought she chose another life. But now the truth was staring back at him from faded pages stained with old tears. Everything he believed was wrong. Then his eyes landed on one final unopened letter at the bottom of the box. Across the front, Mama Grace had written only 7 chilling words. "This is the person who destroyed everything." David slowly reached for the envelope. And froze. David stared at the unopened envelope for several seconds. Outside, the rain hammered against the roof of the small village house. Lightning flashed through the window, briefly lighting the room before darkness returned. His pulse raced. On the front of the envelope, his mother's words seemed to burn into his eyes. Asterisk, this is the person who destroyed everything. Asterisk. With trembling fingers, he slowly opened it. Inside were several documents, old photographs, and one final letter written by Mama Grace shortly before her death. David unfolded the letter. The first name he saw made his heart stop. Victoria. His former fiancée. The woman he had once planned to marry. The woman he had trusted completely. David felt the air leave his lungs. "No," he whispered. He continued reading. Every line revealed another painful truth. Years ago, Victoria had discovered Amina's pregnancy. Coming from one of the wealthiest families in the country, she saw Amina as a threat. A poor village girl. A girl David truly loved. A girl who could destroy Victoria's dream of becoming his wife. According to the letter, Victoria had secretly paid local messengers to intercept Amina's letters. She bribed people to keep information hidden. Some letters were burned. Others were thrown away. Photographs of Samuel as a baby never reached David. Every desperate attempt Amina made to contact him disappeared before it could reach his hands. David's vision blurred. He grabbed one of the photographs from the envelope. It showed Amina holding a newborn baby. Samuel. On the back was a message written in faded ink. Asterisk, David, please come home. Your son needs you. Asterisk. The date was 20 years old. 20 years. David pressed the photograph against his chest. A wave of guilt crashed over him. Suddenly memories returned. The day Amina stopped writing. The months he waited for a reply. The pain of believing she had forgotten him. And then Victoria appearing beside him. Comforting him, telling him that some people simply moved on. He had believed her. Every word. Every lie. Tears filled his eyes. Amina had never abandoned him. She had been fighting to reach him the entire time. While he was building a billion-dollar empire, she was raising their child alone. While he was attending business meetings, she was struggling through life without help. And Samuel. Samuel had grown up believing his father never wanted him. David covered his face with his hands. For the first time in many years, he cried. Not for money. Not for success. But for 20 stolen years that could never be returned. Then he noticed one final document hidden beneath the photographs. It contained a handwritten address. The last known location of Amina and Samuel. David slowly stood up. The rain continued falling outside. But now he knew one thing. Somewhere out there was the son he had never known. And at sunrise, he was going to find him. The next morning, before the sun fully rose over the African plains, David left his mother's village. The address from the old document rested in his pocket. For the first time in 20 years, he was not traveling for business. He was searching for his son. His black SUV moved across dusty roads that stretched between villages, farms, and small towns. Along the way, David stopped everywhere he could. He spoke to elders sitting beneath trees, shopkeepers working behind wooden counters, farmers returning from the fields. Each person gave him a small piece of the puzzle. Amina lived here years ago. They moved after hard times. I heard her son works in the next town. Every answer brought him closer. But every answer also filled him with more fear. What if Samuel refused to see him? What if it was already too late? As the days passed, David barely slept. The image of the baby photograph never left his mind. 20 years. 20 years of birthdays missed. 20 years of memories stolen. 20 years without a father. Finally, late one afternoon, he arrived in a small dusty town surrounded by old buildings and crowded market stalls. A local mechanic pointed toward a repair shop near the edge of town. "You'll find Samuel there," the man said. David's heart immediately began racing. Slowly, he walked toward the garage. The sound of metal tools echoed through the air. Motorcycles lined the entrance. Then he saw him. A young man stood beneath the shade of a tin roof, repairing an old motorcycle engine. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. David couldn't breathe. Samuel looked up briefly. And David felt his knees weaken. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. The same eyes. The same jawline. Even the way he stood looked familiar. It was like looking at a younger version of himself. Samuel wiped sweat from his face and returned to work. His clothes were worn. His hands were covered in grease. Life had clearly not been easy. Nearby, two workers were talking. David overheard one of them laugh. "At least you had a father growing up." Samuel's expression darkened. "My father?" he replied quietly. "I don't have one." The words hit David like a knife. Then Samuel added something that shattered him completely. "The man abandoned me before I was even born." David's eyes filled with tears. He wanted to run forward. He wanted to tell the truth. He wanted to say, "I'm your father." But his feet refused to move. Because deep inside, he feared one thing more than anything else. What if Samuel hated him? And as Samuel suddenly turned and started walking directly toward him, David froze in place. As Samuel walked toward him, David quickly turned away and stepped back into the crowd. His heart was pounding. This was not the moment. Not yet. There were still too many questions. And only one person could answer them. Amina. Later that evening, after asking around town, David finally found the small house where she lived. The home stood at the edge of a dusty road, surrounded by dry grass and a broken wooden fence. It was far smaller than he imagined. The woman he once loved had spent 20 years here. Alone. David slowly approached the door. His hand trembled as he knocked. A few seconds passed. Then the door opened. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Amina stood frozen. David felt his chest tighten. Time had changed her. The young woman he remembered was gone. Her face carried lines of hardship. Her eyes carried years of pain. Yet despite everything, he still recognized her immediately. "Amina," he whispered. Tears instantly filled her eyes. "David." The sound of his name on her lips after 20 years nearly broke him. Inside the small house, silence filled the room. Neither knew where to begin. Finally, Amina spoke. "I waited for you." Her voice trembled. "I waited for months, then years." David lowered his head. Every word felt like a knife. Amina slowly opened an old box beside her chair. Inside were copies of letters she had written long ago. Letters filled with hope. Letters filled with love. Letters begging for help. I thought you would come, she said softly. When no answer came, I believed you chose your new life. A tear rolled down her cheek. I thought money was more important than us. David couldn't speak. The guilt was crushing him. Amina continued. She told him about the hunger. The nights without food. The jobs she worked just to keep Samuel alive. The people who mocked her for raising a child alone. The shame. The loneliness. The heartbreak. And through it all, she never stopped. Believing Samuel deserved a better life. David's eyes filled with tears. Every struggle she described should have been his burden too. But he had never known. Then Amina suddenly began coughing. A deep, painful cough. She grabbed the edge of the table for support. David immediately moved toward her. Concern filled his face. Amina, what's wrong? She looked away. For a moment, she seemed unwilling to answer. Then she finally spoke. The words struck harder than anything he had heard all day. The doctors say I don't have much time left. The room went silent. David stared at her. Unable to breathe. Unable to think. 20 years had already been stolen. And now, he might be losing her forever. At that exact moment, the front door suddenly opened. And Samuel stepped inside. The room fell silent the moment Samuel stepped through the door. His eyes moved from his mother to David. Confusion appeared on his face. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Only the sound of the evening wind slipped through the open window. Samuel placed his work bag on the floor. Mother, is everything okay? He asked. Amina looked at David. David looked at Amina. The truth could no longer wait. Amina slowly stood. Her hands trembled. Samuel, she whispered, there is something you need to know. The young man's expression grew serious. What is it? Tears filled Amina's eyes. She turned toward David. Samuel followed her gaze. His eyes narrowed. The tension inside the small house became unbearable. Finally, Amina spoke the words she had carried for 20 years. David is your father. The world seemed to stop. Samuel froze. His face went completely blank. For a moment, he simply stared at David. Then he laughed. A cold, painful laugh. No. Amina nodded through tears. It's true. Samuel stepped backward. His breathing became heavier. His eyes moved between them again and again. Then the anger came. Years of pain exploded all at once. You're my father, he shouted. David took a step forward. Samuel, please let me explain. Explain what? Samuel snapped. Explain where you were when we had no food. His voice echoed through the house. Explain why my mother cried herself to sleep. David lowered his head. Every word hit him like a hammer. Explain why other children had fathers while I had nothing? Tears burned in Samuel's eyes. I spent my whole life wondering why I wasn't good enough. David's voice shook. I didn't know about you. But Samuel wasn't listening. His anger had become too deep. Too heavy. Too painful. And now a billionaire suddenly appears and wants to be my father? Samuel pointed toward the door. Where were you 20 years ago? David opened his mouth. No answer felt big enough. No. Explanation could erase 20 years of absence. For the first time in his life, he felt completely powerless. His money could not buy back lost birthdays. It could not heal old wounds. It could not replace a missing father. Samuel grabbed his jacket. I don't need you. His voice broke. I never did. Then he turned and walked out. The door slammed behind him. Amina began crying softly. David stood frozen. Broken. Helpless. Alone. Outside, darkness swallowed the road as Samuel disappeared into the night. But neither David nor Amina knew that only a few streets away, Samuel was heading toward a dangerous situation that would change everything before sunrise. The night after Samuel walked away, disaster struck. Amina suddenly collapsed inside her small house. Her breathing became weak. Her body trembled. David caught her before she hit the floor. "Amina," he shouted. Fear filled his voice. Within minutes, she was rushed to the nearest hospital. The doctors worked quickly while David waited outside the emergency room. For the first time in years, the billionaire who controlled companies worth millions felt completely helpless. Hours later, a doctor approached him. The news was devastating. Amina's condition was far worse than anyone realized. Without immediate treatment, she might not survive. The treatment was expensive. Very expensive. But David did not even ask about the cost. "Do whatever is necessary," he said immediately. "Save her." Days turned into weeks. And during those weeks, David barely left the hospital. Every morning he sat beside Amina's bed. Every night he remained in the same chair. Business meetings were cancelled. Important contracts were ignored. Nothing mattered except the woman fighting for her life. Nurses often found him holding Amina's hand while she slept. Sometimes they heard him whisper apologies. Apologies for years he could never return. Apologies for pain he never knew existed. Unknown to David, someone watched from a distance. Samuel. At first, he came only to check on his mother. But each visit left him confused. The billionaire he hated never left. Day after day, David remained there. Not for attention. Not for praise. Simply because he cared. One evening, Samuel stood quietly outside the hospital room. Through the glass window, he saw David asleep in the chair beside Amina's bed. His head rested against the wall. He looked exhausted. Broken. Human. For the first time, doubt entered Samuel's heart. Maybe this man was not pretending. Maybe his regret was real. Inside the room, Amina slowly opened her eyes. Her voice was weak. "David." David immediately woke up and leaned closer. Amina managed a faint smile. "There is something Samuel must know." Tears filled her eyes. "Your mother. Mama Grace." David listened carefully. For years, Mama Grace secretly sent money to help Amina and Samuel survive. The donations always arrived anonymously. School fees. Medical bills. Food during difficult seasons. Everything came from her. She carried the guilt of hiding the truth every day of her life. She wasn't cruel, Amina whispered. She was afraid. A tear rolled down David's cheek. Then suddenly the heart monitor began beeping faster. Doctors rushed into the room. Samuel appeared at the doorway. And as Amina's eyes slowly closed, both father and son stood frozen, terrified they might lose her forever. Months passed. The fear that had filled the hospital slowly gave way to hope. Against all expectations, Amina recovered. Her strength returned little by little. The doctors called it a miracle. David called it a second chance. A second chance for her. A second chance for him. And perhaps a second chance for the family that had been broken for 20 years. One warm afternoon, David returned to the village where everything had begun. The golden African sun stretched across the fields. Children laughed in the distance. Women carried baskets along the dusty road. At the center of the village stood the old baobab tree. The same tree where a young David had once promised Amina that he would return and build a future with her. Back then, they were full of dreams. Now they carried scars. David stood beneath its wide branches and looked up at the sky. The wind moved gently through the leaves. For a moment, he thought about his mother. About the secrets. The mistakes. The guilt she had carried until her final breath. A tear slipped down his cheek. Then he heard footsteps. Slow footsteps approaching from behind. His heart began to race. David slowly turned around. Samuel stood there. Neither man spoke. The silence felt endless. Birds sang in the distance. The village seemed to hold its breath. For months, Samuel had watched David. He had seen him stay beside Amina's hospital bed. He had seen his regret. His sacrifice. His love. And now, standing beneath the tree where this story began, Samuel finally understood the truth. David had not abandoned him. Both of them had been victims of a lie. Samuel's eyes filled with tears. David's hands trembled. Then, after 20 years of pain, anger, and loss, Samuel finally spoke. "Father." The word hit David like a wave. His face crumbled. Tears streamed down his cheeks. For the first time since discovering the truth, he allowed himself to cry openly. A moment later, Samuel stepped forward. David met him halfway. And beneath the old baobab tree, father and son embraced for the very first time. Around them, villagers watched with tears in their eyes. A broken family was finally whole again. Months later, David built a community center in Mama Grace's memory. It helped abandoned children, struggling mothers, and families facing hardship. A place where no child would ever feel forgotten. And the lesson their story left behind was simple. One hidden lie can steal decades of love. But truth, forgiveness, and sacrifice can still heal even the deepest wounds. And sometimes, even after 20 years, love finds its way home. The end.